A preliminary report into last month's fatal Air India crash depicted confusion in the cockpit after the plane's engine fuel cutoff switches flipped almost simultaneously and starved the engines of fuel. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner began to lose thrust and sink shortly after takeoff.
The 15-page preliminary report, you'll notice, is thick with details, maps, trajectories, timelines, but very thin in other areas. This caginess is likely because they know they are dealing with an extremely sensitive case.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now, according to the Financial Times, unlike preliminary reports on crashes involving Boeing aircraft in other countries, the Indian account did not identify the pilots speaking or directly quote their conversation with each other. Now one wonders why. Did they not do so because they weren't sure, or are they simply being careful? The report is very murky and very inexact, said Bjorn Firm, an aerospace engineer and analyst at aviation consultancy Liam News and Analysis. It's not good for the airline.
The report from Indian accident investigators did not say how the switches could have flipped to the cutoff position during the flight.
From the findings,
Former pilot and senior lecturer at Buckinghamshire New University, Marco Chan, says he believes it was a chip malfunction rather than human error that led to the crash.
From a legal standpoint, one has to wonder about liability. If it was a deliberate action by the pilot, is the airline still liable? If it was a chip malfunction, I don't think the airline is liable. I think it might be Boeing. Of course, if Boeing send out a memo telling, or a bulletin asking the airline to do some kind of check on this particular area and they fail to do so, well then isn't the onus on the airline after all? And if the airline isn't liable, if one of the pilots are liable, well, there's no way the victims can be given a fair amount of restitution. Aviation experts said a lack of detail in the preliminary report was deepening the damaging uncertainty created by the crash for Air India and its owner, Tata Group, which has staked its reputation on revamping the former state-run carrier. That is according to the Financial Times. It's also interesting that people have accused me of seeing things or drawing conclusions or speculating when none other than the Airline Pilots Association of India have drawn these safe self-conclusions based on exactly the same source material, again quoting from the Financial Times. The tone and direction of the investigation suggests a bias towards pilot error, said the Airline Pilots Association of India, adding that it rejected this categorically. The Indian Commercial Pilots Association said it was deeply disturbed about reckless and unfounded insinuation of a pilot deliberately taking his own life by some media and members of the public. Now, I must say, I wonder if it's a chip error or if it is the pilot that did something deliberately. How are you going to prove this in a legal setting? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, as a result, there are factions popping up who see this as an organized campaign to avoid accountability. In other words, a conspiracy. Very well-designed campaign to pin it on the pilots. That's what Shiv Arur, a news presenter on broadcaster NDTV, we've already quoted that channel on this channel. The news presenter posted that in a social media post on Saturday, going on to write, "Extremely well played, far bigger mountains have been moved to save the status quo." There are also conspiracies in other areas. Those who have followed my channel know that I covered Boeing in the midst of a lot of fallout. Remember that door panel that flew off? I think it was an Alaskan airline. Remember the whistleblower engineer that died from a gunshot wound in a hotel parking lot in the midst of arbitration hearings with Boeing? Remember, I covered that as well. I actually drove to the site when I was in America as well. According to the Financial Times, some observers have suggested that the preliminary report raises questions for Boeing. Some of these questions are legitimate.
He points to a previously issued service bulletin from the engine manufacturer advising maintenance of a flawed chip to prevent signal loss.
Sarah Stewart, partner at UK firm Stewart's, which is advising families with relatives who died in the crash, said on Saturday that its reading of the report was the pilots were not aware that the fuel had been cut off. That is their legal position. The pilots, plural. Although this is possible, it could also be that when one pilot denied turning the switches to the cut-off position, he did so knowing that wasn't true. This is a critical legal point on which a great deal rests.
I believe the FAA has, or together with GE General Electric, the engine manufacturer, has issued a service bulletin. I believe it was about 11,000 cycles they will have to replace the chip. And if it is not replaced or maintenance isn't done correctly, it could lead to intermittent loss of signal. Once you have a loss of signal, the fuel isn't commanded, i.e. in the cutoff position, then there's no fuel going to the engine.
What is indisputable is that one pilot asked the other if he had moved the switches, and moving them can only be done deliberately. On the other hand, the switches were found to be not in the cutoff position, but in the run position. And so I guess the black box will have to determine for a fact if the switches themselves were manually moved from run to cutoff and back to run again.
Chan says it would be a challenge for pilots to accidentally move the switches into the cutoff position.
You have to physically sort of not pull the pin, but if you have to pull the toggle out, then it can move to a different position. So you do have to do it on purpose, not accidentally knocking it to the wrong position. Very rarely that can happen, or is close to zero.
According to the Times, the factual information, this is in the preliminary report, raises a troubling spectre that this accident may have been caused by uncommanded fuel cutoff, suggesting a possible failure in the Boeing system, Stewart said in a statement. Well, if that is true, Boeing is going to find itself in a world of hurt given all of its other problems. But I'm not sure I believe that. Do you? So far, it does seem as if Tata, the company that owns Air India, will foot the compensation bill. They've already undertaken to do so. What is interesting is that I read a report that said the pilot didn't take medical leave according to the company. Now they are saying he did. Now, according to the New York Post, a spokesman for the airline's parent company, Tata Group, confirmed the pilot's records were turned over. He did take bereavement leave in 2022 following his mother's death, and his medical records were submitted as part of the investigation, and the preliminary report did not find anything noteworthy. Well, I would say the preliminary report in this area perhaps has been careful and discreet. The preliminary report now takes the investigation into perhaps a new and sensitive direction. According to the Post, Mark Martin, chief executive of aviation advisory firm Martin Consulting, said that the disaster was likely to hit Air India with third-party liabilities and legal and compensation costs, as well as a loss of long-haul passengers because of credibility fears. So a lot of money is riding on the outcome of this either way. Incredibly, in spite of the disaster, demand for Air India flights have not dipped or been dented in the least. According to the Financial Times, the carrier remains in demand given that India's skies are ruled by a near duopoly and passenger numbers have doubled over the past decade. Air India holds almost 30% of the domestic market, trailing behind its main rival Indigo's over 60%. This insatiable demand brings back the original contention that Air India couldn't spare any pilots, and those they had were treated, well, some have alleged, like bus drivers, not given sufficient time for rest and recovery. So once again, we're dealing with a very iffy situation. Was this an accident or foul play? Was it glitchy machinery or a deliberate action by one of the pilots? Well, time will tell. I'm not going to take it further than that, but aviation industry experts believe the full crash probe could take as long as a year. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.